What's up, my fellow devs? It's been quite some time. Today let's talk about some Spring dependency injection questions that I get asked quite often. How to inject or autowire third-party classes or classes that we can't modify. And when to use annotation bin. Let's use our existing project to discuss a little bit. In our SD Camp Web API project, we're already using dependency injection. We are injecting this repository class into our member controller to display a list of members. Notice that we're not using Autowire annotation here. It's optional and it's implied. You can add it if you want. It doesn't really matter in this case. The reason why member repository can be injected this way is because member repository extends CRUD repository provided by Spring Data. And this CRUD repository has this no repository bin annotation. Any interface that extends interface with the no repository bin annotation is injectable by Spring. To demonstrate today's topic better, we will create our own service class and inject this service class in a similar way. Alright, let's create a member service class, and we will have a function that returns a list of member names. The member names method expects a list of members. Alright, this function is done, and make sure to mark to add a service annotation so that it can be injected into the controller. Alright, let's go to controller and then auto-wire it or inject it. By the way, this is called constructor injection, I guess. Alright, we already have a get all endpoints to return all the members in JSON. We will add another one just to return a list of names. And then we call the injected member service to return list of names. Get member names requires a collection of members, and we will get that using member repository that's already in this controller. I know. Oh yeah. This guy is returning a string instead of a number. And see if it's running. Let's run the project and go to our endpoint. I think it's called names. Alright, so it returns 3 names from our database. That's cool. But here's the problem. What if member service class is in a third-party library, or we cannot change it? In other words, we cannot add the service annotation like this. We cannot add this service annotation. Without this service annotation, we're not able to inject the way we inject here. We can't inject here. How do we then let Spring manage the class for us and make it injectable? Yes, that's right, that's today's topic. We can use bin annotation. To demonstrate what I mean, I'm going to remove this service annotation, and assuming this is the class that we cannot touch, but we still want to use this function. And now let's stop the server, and then we run the server again. Okay, here's a problem. Parameter 1 of constructor required a bin of type member service that could not be found, right? That means that we're not able to find the member service that's supposed to be injected here. If we add it back, that's gonna work. To make this member service injectable again or working again without adding the add service annotation because we cannot touch it, we need to make it injectable with bin annotation. To do that, we need a configuration class and put the bin annotated method in it and make it return the service class. Let's go ahead and add a configuration class. Add a package called config and add a configuration class. Let's just call it configure bin configurations. And then we need first add a configuration annotation. This is the key. And then we need to add a bin annotation and make a method to return the service class. Get member service. Right here, we're going to return a new member service. This is going to tell Spring that it needs to process and generate this bin for the application to use. In our case, we want Spring to make member service class injectable. Go back to the member controller. There's nothing we need to do here because we already made member service injectable and usable. Let's run the application again. Okay, it started correctly, and then right here, and then refresh it. It's working again without changing the member service class. There are a lot more to bin annotation than what's covered today. The next thing I want to mention is the naming of the method in the bin configuration. I recommend that you use Java naming convention. If you want to return a member service class, just do add a get and then member service with the first letter M capitalized, or you can just do same name as class but use a camel case. Some people might ask, why is it important? If we cannot have control over the classes, can we just instantiate the class inside the class or method where it's being used? Why do we have to use bin for these third-party classes or the classes that we cannot modify? It's important because we want our class to be a well-designed class. A well-designed class needs to be easily testable. If, for example, we don't inject member service here, we will need to do something like this. We need to instantiate inside the controller like this. it's going to work. The program will run. However, when we test the member controller, we have no control over the instantiation of the member service in that unit testing environment. Because when we construct member controller, it's already in here. We cannot mark it, we cannot mark the class, we cannot mark the method of the class. We have no control over it. So it's harder to test. That's mainly why we want to always use constructor injection whenever possible. And Bing annotation enables us to do that even if we cannot add service annotation to make it injectable. Hope that makes sense. This kind of leads to another question, which is why is dependency injection important to testing? This is another topic of another day. I will cover that later. Because this video is focusing on demoing and explaining, there's not much to do with the development of our web app project. However, we must have some progress in each video in this series. Therefore, let's do a spring version update for the project to conclude this video. Alright, let's stop the server and revert the change because our project doesn't need this demoing code. And then let's check our spring version. This is gonna be it, 2.2.6, and that was a couple months ago. I'm sure there will be new version. Let's go ahead and take a look at what the latest version of Spring Boot is. Alright, looks like it's 2.3.5. Copy this. And then update here. Refresh Gradle. Okay, looks like it's finished. Let's run this thing and see if it's still working. Okay, it's running fine. Let's check our member controller if it's still working. Notice that I just reverted our change today because that was for testing and demoing purposes. I'm going to test this endpoint instead. Members. Oops, members. Okay, it's still working. We already updated Spring Boot, and then let's push the change. Looks like it wants me to authorize JetBrains to use our GitHub account. Again. Somehow it cannot authorize me. Anyways, there's some hiccups on the authorization of our GitHub account. Let's see if I can do that over here. I forgot my password. Copy password. Paste. Alright, it's pushed successfully. Let's take a look. Oh, 2.3.5. That's correct. Alright, that's it for today's video. I'll see you guys later.